Okay, everyone, and welcome to the next in our Scale Up Live series. We've been running these for a couple of weeks now, and each week we cover a slightly different topic, all focused around growth and marketing strategies and tips for startups. I'm Ness. I'm a marketing strategist at the Scale Up Collective. My background spans in-house and brand marketing as well as creative agency side as well. And at the Scale Up Collective, we work with challenger brands to develop their go-to-market strategies. And I'm joined today by the wonderful Liz Painter. Hello, Liz. Would you like to?
Hi, Ness. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Painter. I run a micro agency doing email strategy and copywriting called Comma. And we work with businesses across software, tech, e-commerce, and service businesses, and putting great email strategies in place to help them bring in more leads, more customers, and connect with their audience.
Brilliant. Amazing. Well, it's so good to have you here today. And we're going to talk about email marketing essentially today. And personally, I'm a very big fan of email. It's been the heart of a few successful strategies that I've worked across over the years. And fundamentally, it's a very accessible medium, I think, particularly for startups. You don't need big budgets or specialist technical skills to get going. And there's so many useful use cases for it and relevant times to use it in your kind of customer journey. But today, I thought it'd be useful to focus on email sequences specifically. So often when we talk about email, people immediately think about kind of one-off shots and cross your fingers and hope for the best and hope for and all the users and all the upgrades and things. But actually, email sequences are really powerful conversion tool and a great way to nurture and engage your audience. So maybe we'll start with that. So Liz, over to you as the expert here, but in your view and kind of your experience, when does planning an email sequence versus a kind of one-off shot make most sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really rare that we would work on one-off email shots because most things you want to achieve in business, you're going to need more than one touch point to make it happen. I think the exception is if you've already got a really strong relationship with your audience and you've built up quite a strong community, you can just fire something off and say, hey, I've got this offer, buy this, and people will. But generally, that's not the reality for a lot of businesses, especially in the early days. I would always look at a sequence over an individual email. People talk about all these different touch points, don't they? You need 9 touch points, 11 touch points, 57 touch points, whatever it is to create a customer. And there's no hard and fast rule. But for example, things like welcome emails, a nice number can be 5 to 7 emails because it just gives you time to introduce yourself, get your message across, talk about things from the customer's perspective, which of course you'll have spoken to your customers, so you know what that perspective is. And then, other sequences that we write, like onboarding sequences, depending on how complex a product is, it can be, anything from a handful of emails. I've done 16 emails in an onboarding sequence. So it really depends on what you need to get across.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you typically start to sort of plan those out? What's kind of the first step in that process?
Yeah, sure. So it usually starts with research. So we're talking to customers. We might be looking in on sales calls, going into a bit of review mining, looking online what people are saying about that product or products in that area if they haven't launched yet. And just getting a feel for what the important messages are to get over in those emails, and then creating a hierarchy so which are the most important messages and putting those in the earlier emails, because generally, especially with something like a welcome sequence, that the earlier emails do get more opens. Same with anything really. When you sign up to, say, a software product, you're very enthusiastic at the beginning, you're opening the emails, and that might wane over time. So the first few emails are the most important ones.
Yeah, makes sense. And I suppose the other side of it is really understanding what you're trying to achieve with these sequences, right? And not trying to do too many things at once, but having kind of a clear, simple.
Exactly. It's having a strategy and it's thinking, what is the purpose of this? If it's onboarding, then usually it's to get someone using the product, so that they get to that point where they can't live without it. If it's same with the trial to paid sequence, if someone's on a free trial, you want them to really get into the product before that trial is up. So with any sequence, you want to think, I mean, a really good example actually is, say, a nurtured demo sequence. So often, especially with a service business, the first thing you want someone to do is actually book a call with you,
Mm.
so that you can chat to them about the product. And getting someone to that, you're often not going to be able to, they're not going to read that first email and go, oh, yeah, I'll book a call, unless you've really hit them at that exact right moment where they've been thinking about it. So that's really good for a sequence. And it can, you can build on what you said before. I'm sorry, I've forgotten exactly what specific question you asked me about sequences.
Just about that kind of having a clear goal, right? And
Yeah, having a clear goal. So if you know your goal is to get someone on a call, all of your emails need to lead to that. Every single one doesn't have to have that as the call to action. You know, the earlier emails might be to click through to read a case study or to, something else that's informational. But your goal of the whole sequence is to get them to book a call.
Yeah, okay. And I suppose in that scenario, some of those earlier emails might be designed specifically to overcome some specific objections people have that you found through that research, right? To kind of
Exactly that.
or get them into the right mindset to have that call.
Yeah. Often there will be emails further down the sequence that are dealing with any hesitations they might have. The best thing you can do is, if you've spoken to any new customers you've got and said, what, just before you hit that buy button or you book the call with me or whatever, was there anything that made you hesitate or made you think, oh, I'm not sure this is for me? And then you can deal with that in your emails.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. And one of the things, this is such a big bugbear of mine, but let's just talk about length of email for a minute, because this is something that I'm sure you get the same, and I'm sure there's lots of different schools of thought and opinions on this, but one of my biggest frustrations, I suppose, actually sometimes when it comes to email, is that the tendency is to want to keep things very short and very concise, short attention spans, people on the go, which makes sense. But I also come from a school of thought of that if you have something useful and relevant to say, then it's okay to say it. It doesn't have to be trimmed down to 3 bullet points for it to be a good email, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a really good reason that people want short copy, which is that, you don't want to be waffling on, you want to be as concise as you can be. And, we get fed all the time. People have short attention spans. They're on their phone, more than 50% of users for most industries are looking on their phone at an email. So you don't want massive blocks of text, but you need the amount of copy you need to explain your product or to, convince someone of your argument. And sometimes that means you need long copy. And what I would say is, don't have boring emails. Make sure they're fun to read, they're interesting to your audience, but it doesn't have to be super short. It doesn't have to be this kind of 3 paragraphs and done. That's quite trendy in a lot of industries,
Yeah.
because sometimes when you run split tests, the client will say, oh, that looks too long, I don't like it that long. And you say, well, let's just run it and see what happens. And we've had versions of emails where the number of signups to a demo has gone up by 50% with longer copy.
Amazing.
It needs to say something, it needs to have the right messaging in there and communicate the right things. But length is the wrong thing to focus on. You just want to focus on getting your message across.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point, actually, that I also think it's sort of never too soon to start split testing and doing some of those quick experiments with your emails, because so many of the platforms make that so easy now for you to actually achieve and to test different content in the email or different subject lines and things like that. That it's actually a really important practice, I think, to get into quite early on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, subject lines are really important. What you'll find is, as long as all of your emails are quite valuable, and they're connecting with your audience, subject lines can become less important down the line, because they see your name and they know you send good emails. So, sometimes people say, oh, focus half your time on the subject line. I'm not sure that is the case. I think focus enough time on the subject line to get a good one that will get opened. But the inside of your email needs to be good as well, because that's what keeps people opening the rest of your emails. I always kind of say that, the subject line is there to get it opened. The first line is there to hook you in. And then the next line is there to get you to read the next sentence. And the next, each sentence needs to get people to keep reading.
So you're sort of like breadcrumbing people basically down to, that's such a good point, actually, that if you set that expectation with people early on that you're going to give them something good and useful, valuable, then they're more likely to continue to open your emails. Much better practice than just messing around with subject lines. I never actually thought of it that way, but that's a really good way.
Yeah, and on that point, it's good to look at your from name as well. So ideally you want your from name, unless you're Marks and Spencers, in which case you can get away with your from name being a company. But for most companies, they want their from name to be a person. It could be, you know, I don't know, Monica at name of company, but a person connects so much better than just a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, on that note, in my previous role, we did a huge amount of email marketing, and we always did that, and we tested that quite early on, doing whether. And we always used lots of different people's names, so it sort of felt like you were talking to lots of people at the business rather than just kind of this faceless
Oh,
organization.
that's interesting. I haven't done that with lots of different names.
And depending on what you're talking about, you kind of, you know, give that expertise to somebody in the customer success team or somebody in the product team, you know, CEO, or so it always felt like it was really actually somebody writing to you personally, and that was kind of the approach we took, which always seemed to be more effective than kind of having these fake kind of generic company newsletter style things that just could have come from anyone.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think generally a focused email on one topic generally can get a better result than a newsletter that's jumping around on lots of different topics. It does depend, but that's where, you know, planning sequences a different kettle of fish from a newsletter. You know, you've got a goal in mind and you're planning what you want to achieve, and then you can measure whether you achieve that goal. Whereas a newsletter can be more relationship building. It doesn't always have to have a specific goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, so we talked a little bit earlier about kind of like number of emails in the sequence and things. In your view, is there a number that's too many?
I mean, I've had clients where together, as you know, as a team, we've written a year's worth of emails in a sequence to really, because some companies have really long sales cycles, and it takes that kind of length of time to persuade someone that they actually need to think about switching to your service. So there's definitely no kind of upper limit, although eventually things are going to go out of date, I guess, if you've got an automated sequence that's going out over time to to new people all the time. Eventually you want to be checking that to check it's not out of date, because you might be referring to some big news event, like, I'm not going to say it, but recent events. And it's no longer relevant. Hopefully one day it will no longer be relevant. So yeah, you'll probably have to take care. But yeah, I mean, I think even with a really complex product, kind of 16 emails is usually enough. But I wouldn't ever say there's a maximum. If I did customer interviews and I found that there were 17 different points that had been mentioned by everyone, then I would want to get them all into an email, and I'd want to keep 1 point per email. So
yeah, that makes sense. And do you think there's is there any best practice or that you've seen from kind of past campaigns and results, that the frequency of those, like, is sending sequences every day?
Yeah, I think what works well is having them reasonably close together at the start and then more spaced out. Sometimes you're constrained because it's a 30-day trial and you need to get a certain number of messages out over those 30 days. But generally, like, kind of really going for it in the first week, maybe one on day 1, one on day 2, one on day 4, day 6, and then maybe spacing them out a bit more. Kind of depends on the product. But yeah, that kind of cadence works quite well.
Yeah, okay. I think also, like you say, it sort of depends again on the context and the goal ultimately. But when I've done them before, and they were all built around an app product essentially, and with various different features, and so we had so many different sequences that were related to general onboarding and getting people through the sign up flow was one, and then they'd done that, getting them to take that first action and figuring out what we wanted that first action to be, took quite a lot of testing to sort of figure out how the sequence should begin. And then even with every individual feature, there were then mini sequences to get them to complete actions and take those next steps and get the maximum value. But and one of the concerns we always had at the time was that we might be, it could be a bit overwhelming, but actually a lot of the tools that you can use to build sequences allow you to set parameters around, like, don't send more than 3 emails in a single day, because if you're in different.
Yeah, and a really good thing is to give the customer or the prospect some control as well. So you can say, are we sending you too many emails? And they can pick, keep it as it is, go down to 1 a week, go down to 2 a week, they can click a link. So that can be quite useful.
Yeah, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
And from your experience, are there any particular platforms or tools that you think are best for this type of activity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in ActiveCampaign. I think it's one of the best tools. It's really simple to use. There's not a big learning curve to get in there, and it's not horrendously expensive when you're starting out as well. Up to 1,000 users is really reasonable.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my main recommendation for a lot of industries. For online stores, I would say Klaviyo is probably the best option because it is more set up for online stores than ActiveCampaign is.
Yeah, makes sense. And in terms of the step before that, when you're sort of planning at a high level these sequences, is there where do you do those? We used to do them in sort of like Lucid, big whiteboards that we could collaborate with other team members on. Is there any sort of tools or ways that you've done that well in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I can be quite lo-fi some of the time, so I have done where I write every message I want to get in, I'll write on a post-it note and stick them on the wall, and then kind of rearrange them until I'm happy that I've got the right arrangement. There's also Miro, which is a similar thing online, which you can use. And with really complicated projects, I've used spreadsheets where I've kind of tallied up the number of times I've heard a message, and therefore that becomes the first message. So yeah, it's really very dependent on the project, but yeah, I'm in fact, I posted today on LinkedIn about still being quite lo-fi in terms of reading aloud the copy that I write before I kind of send it off to the client, just to check there's nothing that stands out as being a bit weird or not, not in flow. And I think a lot of these kind of old-fashioned ways of doing things, they work, they connect with your brain in a different way. So yeah, pen and paper. A message on each post-it, and stick them on the wall and rearrange them until you've got, email 1, email 2, email 3, and so on.
Yeah, I like that. And yeah, I really liked your post this morning. And actually, I was just thinking about, because I do the same thing. I always read everything aloud to just hear how it sounds and make sure it's coming across as I intended it to. And when we were talking about length earlier, that struck me as another way to sort of, as a measure of that, when you're, when we're talking about length, it's not about cramming as much in as possible, but if you need the time to explain something, take it. But reading it aloud can probably be a good way of kind of assessing, like, oh, actually, I'm getting bored listening to myself read this.
Yes.
Stress test.
Yeah, no, I don't find I get bored reading it, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I suppose with particularly long copy, it can. But yeah, emails luckily don't take that long to read. It's sales pages can get to that point, I guess.
Yeah. And if you had to give sort of one piece of advice when it comes to kind of getting started and nailing your email marketing, what would it be?
I think the point is, when you sit down to write an email, you always need to know, first of all, who you're writing it for, and what the goal of that email is. If you don't know the goal, then stop and figure out what that email's purpose is. I tend to work with the rule of 1. So you've got, one reader. Who is the one person you're writing it to? I know we all have these different categories of people that might read our stuff, but who's the one person you really want to read it? Write it for them. Pick one goal, not 2, and have one call to action. Some of these rules you can break occasionally, but I think if you stick to them, 99% of the time, it's really, really helpful. So what is the one thing you want them to do? Because as soon as you give people more than one call to action, one thing they could do in that email, they've got a decision to make. Instead of just thinking yes or no, they've got to think, oh, do I do that thing or that thing? Do I go and follow them on Facebook, or do I go and do this thing over here that they've, and it's too many different things, then often they'll do nothing. So just have one call to action.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. The rule of 1. Great. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for joining us today. It's brilliant. And this really is just a taster of the course that the lesson we have on this, specifically actually on the Startup Marketing Accelerator program that we've just taken online. So for anybody who's interested in finding out more or learning more about these topics, we've created a self-guided program for bootstrap startups that need a marketing strategy without the price tag, and it's all online in a sort of self-serve format, so that makes it easy for you to learn when it suits you. And today's just really a taste of the kind of thing that you can expect from there. So I'll post a link in the chat for anybody who's interested in finding a little bit more about the course. And we will catch everybody hopefully next week for our next session, which is going to be around DIY PR. All right. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Ness.
Good day.
Bye.
Bye.